Warning, this podcast contains violence, sexuality, gore, and other horrible and disturbing things. Listener discretion is advised. Also, the hosts of this venture are ignorant dipshits, so please do not take anything they say as fact. And enjoy the show.
Now, are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then we'll begin.
Today we had 15 homicides and 63 violent crimes, as if that's the way it's supposed to be.
The atoms in your left hand probably came from a different star than your right hand.
It is our basic human right to be fuck up.
A second plane now has crashed into the other tower of the World Trade Center.
Putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
The defendant shall be incarcerated for the rest of her natural life with no possibility of parole.
You are not machines. You are not cattle. You are men.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Occultae Veritatis.
Hello, occultists, and welcome back to Occultae Veritatis podcast. My name is Leon Filger, along with
Sage Murray,
Ood Gallifrey,
and Richard Bigley.
And joining us in studio,
Declan the Wizard.
In February 2015, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled in Carter v. Canada that parts of the criminal code would need to change to satisfy the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The parts that prohibited medical assistance in dying would be no longer valid. The Supreme Court gave the government until June 6, 2016 to create a new law. In June 2016, the Parliament of Canada passed federal legislation that allows eligible Canadian adults to request medical assistance in dying. This episode is going to be heavy, so let's start with something light. It's time for What's Your Poison?
So, what's your poison?
What's your poison?
Does everyone have one? Oh, you don't have one.
Pardon moi.
That was alarming.
Okay, so today's beverage, Ood and I just got back from the Ness Creek Music Festival.
Yep.
And this shit was aplenty, and it was the first time I've ever had it, and it was incredible, and I had 12 of them.
Ooh, it's high in alcohol, too.
Rock Creek Dry Cider, apple cider with pear, 5.8% alcohol by volume.
Ooh, that's tart.
It's good.
That's just the right amount of tart.
Yeah.
Super good.
It is super good.
Super good.
Not too sweet.
I wouldn't even say anything close to sweet. I'd
Nope.
say like
it's a dry.
It is
cider.
just dry. It is tart and like green apple and
pear.
Like a hint of pear for some sweetness, so you're not just like
sucking on a Granny Smith.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the name of my new folk band.
That is the name of my new porn movie.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one. Okay, yeah, that's the name of your porno.
That's the name of your porn. I think this is delicious. I fucking love pears and eat them all the goddamn time.
Fucking love pears.
Fucking love pears.
Watch that formaldehyde, buddy.
I'm fine. I work with so many goddamn drugs, it doesn't matter.
Me too, man. Me too.
But I think it's delicious. I think it's good. It is dry. It is for people who don't like dry stuff. They wouldn't like this. But if you like Granny Smith,
it's drier than a Strongbow, which is a pretty dry cider.
Yeah. It's not super dry though. Like you're not going like you don't need cheese and crackers to replenish your mouth anymore.
And it's not as dry as like dry wine.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna rate this 1 ecstasy out of 3 acids, magic mushrooms, and a boatload of weed.
Oh.
Like a big boat or a small boat?
I'm talking like
cruise
a
liner?
5-ounce bucket.
A 5-ounce bucket of weed. Okay.
I like that.
Okay.
I could get behind that.
That's a reasonable amount.
I'll give it like an 8 out of 10.
I can smoke that before it goes bad. Maybe. Maybe. With proper storage.
Proper storage.
Yeah.
Declan?
I think I'd probably give this, if you really like pears and Granny Smith apples, I'd probably give this a 9.5 out of 10.
Wow.
I personally, I'm not that big a fan of green apples, so I'm going to give it a 7 because I'm just not a fan of green apples. But if you are, this is the thing for you.
Ms. Thatcher?
I would give it a strong 6 to 10. I'm not super big on cider, but I would drink this again.
I drink you again.
Okay, have we all rated then?
I think so.
Okay.
No.
No?
Who didn't?
7 out of 10. It's nice.
It's nice.
I like the margarita better because I'm a basic bitch. Yeah.
You are a basic bitch. I love it.
Yeah. Hey, cult members. Just a small disclaimer here and a content warning. The next clip is a clip of somebody going through medically assisted death, and you hear the death on audio. So skip ahead about 2 minutes to avoid that.
Peter Lawrence Smedley, are you sure that you want to drink this medicament with which you will sleep and die?
Yes, I'm quite sure that's what I want to do.
I'll give you the medicament. You are sure?
I'm sure. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for looking after me.
No, nothing. Nothing.
And I'd like to thank everybody else. They've been first class too. Jerry?
Goodbye.
Thank you, John. It's been a privilege. My wife's very good at putting me to sleep just by rubbing my hands. Be strong, my darling.
I know. Just relax.
Yeah. Water.
No. Sleeping now, very deep. No pain at all. He's snoring, he's sleeping very, very deep. He feels in unconsciousness, and then afterwards the breathing will stop, and then the heart.
Okay, so by popular demand, I'm doing another bioethics episode. You guys had called for them after the bioethics episode. You wanted to do abortion, you wanted me to do infant male circumcision, and you wanted me to do medical assisted dying, so I took the heaviest one in the pile, and we're doing medical assistance in dying.
Yeah, this is like fucking lead, this one.
Yeah. Okay, so let's begin by defining some terms. Suicide is the act of intentionally causing one's own death. Assisted suicide is suicide undertaken with the assistance of another person. Physician-assisted suicide is when suicide is assisted by a physician or other healthcare provider. Euthanasia is the practice of intentionally ending a life to relieve pain and suffering.
When I was young, they were talking about euthanasia, and I thought it was like youth in Asia.
Like Chinese kids?
Yeah.
Oh, I absolutely did that too.
Yeah. Okay, sorry.
Voluntary euthanasia is the practice of ending a life in a painless manner with the informed consent of the patient. Involuntary euthanasia is the practice of ending a life in a painless manner without the informed consent of the patient.
Is it the same as death by suicide? Or is it distinguished?
Well, it's euthanasia. In Canada, it's considered first-degree murder. I mean, this is a Robert Latimer case, which was another bioethics episode I did.
Call back to that one.
Yeah.
That was a good episode.
So as far as my background, 7 years ago, I started working as a care aide in a 12-bed palliative care unit. And I noticed that about 50% of my patients would have chosen medically assisted death over palliative care. But at the time, it was illegal in Canada, and I was practicing in a Catholic hospital where to this day, discussions about medical assistance in dying cannot be had on the premises. And there are literally stories of families and doctors heading to the gas station across the street from the hospital to sign medical assistance in dying documents.
Lord in heaven.
It's fucking wild.
It's fucking wild.
Yeah.
Now we're opening a new hospice in Saskatoon, which is something that's sorely needed, but it's also run by the Catholics, and so it's also illegal to discuss MAID on the premises.
Christ.
What's the point of it?
So I just wanted to say that I am slowly working toward opening my own hospice called the Cider House in Saskatoon, which is a maid-only facility. So you come in, it's a very home-like setting. It's got the fireplace, a jet tub, et cetera, and people come and live for a few days. There's pull-out beds and whatnot, so their families can come stay with them. Then they die, and we help with everything from picking out their clothes to making funeral arrangements, writing the obituary for them, all the decedent care that someone would possibly need. So in 10 or 20 years, fingers crossed, the Cider House is going to be a thing, and I'll be the executive director.
And I'll be working there.
And Sage will be working there.
That's amazing, man. That's really awesome.
Yeah. So
I'll be bartender.
we need a shit ton of funding for it, but I believe there's the political will for it.
I think so, and political need. I mean, there's a definite need within it in the healthcare region here.
In 2014, 79% of Canadians were in favor of medical assistance in dying.
Great. Yeah.
So there is an appetite for it.
Yeah.
When someone has a serious medical condition, if they meet certain criteria and they ask to die, they may qualify for an assisted death.
Bill was diagnosed with brain cancer.
My mom had endometrial cancer.
She had congestive heart failure.
My mom had MS, also known as multiple sclerosis.
Medical assistance in dying, or MAID, is when a healthcare professional, specifically a doctor or a nurse practitioner, administers medication that causes the death of the patient who's explicitly requested. In other words, the healthcare provider gives you a medication that causes your death. It can be given as a drink, or it can be given intravenously. Both will work, and the healthcare professional will stay with you until you've died. What I want people to know is that MAID is legal in Canada. It's legal and it's available in every province and every territory. This is now a covered medical service in Canada. If this is something you'd like to request, you need to ask for it. Not just verbally, but written as well. There's a specific form you need to fill out, and it needs to be witnessed by 2 independent witnesses.
So currently, assisted death is legal in the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Switzerland, Canada, Colombia, Australia, and the U.S. states of Oregon, Washington, Montana, Vermont, and California. Now, when I first dreamt up this episode, I had planned to talk about assisted suicide internationally, but in light of the 2 interviews I did and their respective lengths, I'm going to stick to medical assistance in dying from an exclusively Canadian perspective.
Yeah. Neat. Laws and regulations and all that, just even discussions or philosophies in your area may be different. So get involved in your local discussion on MAID.
For sure. So in Canada, physician-assisted suicide is formerly called medical assistance in dying, or MAID. And MAID has been legal in Canada for 3 years as of this recording. The MAID law in Canada is highly restrictive, and patients must meet strict conditions in order to be eligible for the program. Opponents of MAID will usually argue in favor of palliative care. Now, this is nice in a perfect world, but in reality, as I said, palliative care is not realistic for many terminal patients. My experience in palliative care was supremely depressing in that when people did get to the point of their death, they were so emaciated that they couldn't hug their families goodbye.
Christ.
I mean, I had a case of a young mother who had 2 children, and it was my job to hold her upright in bed so they could hug her as she passed. It's a traumatizing thing to go through, seeing so many people die suffering. And the idea that palliative care is the cure-all and fix-all for people who are dying is complete and utter bullshit. Yeah. And I don't say that as an ideologue. I say that as someone who's worked in the system for 7 years. Palliative care is bullshit.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure it's fine for some people.
There are some
like
people
off you go. But
there are some people for whom palliative care, Catholics in particular,
Yeah.
For whom it's just perfect.
Yep.
But
Majority of
realistically,
people.
most people don't want that.
No.
They want to die while they're still well enough to hug their kids.
Yeah.
So let's begin by talking about what exactly palliative care is and what it isn't. So the guiding principles of palliative care are as follows. It's person/family centered. So the person is engaged in and directs his or her care, including deciding how family members will be involved. When care is provided, the person and family, as determined by the person, are treated as a unit. All aspects of care are provided in a manner that are sensitive to the person's and family's personal, cultural, and religious values, beliefs, and practices, their developmental state, and the preparedness to deal with the dying process. Number 2, ethical. All hospice palliative care activities are guided on the ethical principles of autonomy, beneficence, non-malfeasance, justice, truth-telling, and confidentiality, and we discussed all of those in the bioethics issue. So
I remember those.
Please go listen to that.
Yeah, we explained them in full.
All research protocols comply with legislation and regulations governing research and the involvement of human subjects in effect within the jurisdiction. 3, high quality. All hospice palliative care activities are guided by standards of practice based on nationally accepted principles and norms of practice and standards of professional conduct for each discipline. 4, team-based / circle of care. Hospice palliative care is most effectively delivered by an interprofessional team of healthcare providers who are both knowledgeable and skilled in all aspects of care within their discipline and practice. The professional team comes together with family members, friends, and other caregivers to form a circle of care around the person and family. Number 5, safe and effective. And this is the bit that I sort of hang up on. All hospice palliative care activities are conducted in a manner that ensures confidentiality and privacy, is without coercion, discrimination, harassment, or prejudice, is beneficial and does not create undue risk or burden, that's questionable, ensures safety and security, ensures continuity and accountability, minimizes unnecessary duplication and repetition, and complies with laws, regulations, and policies in effect within the jurisdiction and hospice palliative care organizations, which is fucked in Saskatoon because the Catholic Church has got the monopoly on palliative care and hospice in the city, and it's goddamn criminal. Accessible. All individuals and families have equal access to hospice palliative care services wherever they live, at home or within a reasonable distance from their home, and when they need it. And then it goes on to say adequately resourced, collaborative, advocacy-based, evidence-informed, and knowledge-based. And those are sort of self-explanatory.
Yeah, yeah.
So what I tell people is that palliative care is symptom-focused care for patients with serious illness, no matter the diagnosis, no matter the prognosis. Whereas hospice is a subset of palliative care that we offer to patients at the end of life with a prognosis of 6 months or less. So for example, a young woman could get a diagnosis of breast cancer. Now she's going to get chemo, she's going to get surgery, she may be cured and live another 40 years. However, it's a terrifying diagnosis. She's young, she's got a young family. She might have pain from the surgery, she might have pain from the treatment, the chemotherapy. So palliative care can come in to talk about how do we manage those symptoms. The fact that you're dealing with the possibility of your own mortality as a young woman with young children, how are you managing that? What support do you need? She may live for a very long time, but she still benefits from palliative care. Hospice is for patients who are in that last 6 months of life. So patients who have a limited prognosis, but still need that multidisciplinary approach of having a physician who can help with medications for pain and symptom management, of having a nurse who can provide care for them specific to their symptoms, having social work who can help do family meetings and discuss goals of care, and maybe need spiritual support in the form of chaplaincy. So that's how I really think about the difference.
Yeah, they kind of have the same effect as like Catholic-run abortion clinics. Like they tend to recommend away from whatever fits their morals, or recommend towards whatever fits their morals, regardless of if it's best for the patient or not.
It's so bizarre working in a Catholic palliative care unit because everyone speaks in hushed tones, right? I mean, there is some discussion, but it's done very quietly. It'll be a patient saying, hey, can I get out of here? Like, can you send me home? Like, I want to be discharged to die at home.
Yeah.
And the palliative care nurses will say, well, you know, you're too well at this point. And I'm going to get, in my next point, I'm going to get to the eligibility for MAID. And it's super fucky the way the Catholic system wants you to stay in the palliative care unit until you're too sick to get MAID. They want to guarantee that you die on their unit.
Christ.
Because they want the statistics to say that they've got a 100% success rate in treating patients in palliative circumstances, that their patients are not being discharged before they die.
Christ.
Oh, yeah.
So it's all about keeping their records and standards and rates up?
You bet.
Christ.
Yeah.
I would even argue it's not about records, standards, and rates. It's about optics.
Oh,
If they just want that 100%, it's just an optics game.
Yeah.
So you Jimmy rigged the what is considered X and Y to get the 100%. It's a terrible thing. Anyway.
Yeah. Okay, so let's take a look at the eligibility for MAID. Now, this description is taken from the 6th edition of Canadian Fundamentals of Nursing, a book that I paid $159 for and have never used but can't sell because it's already fucking out of date.
Whoops.
So client eligibility for MAID, and this comes out of section 241.21 of the Criminal Code of Canada. So only physicians and nurse practitioners can access a client's can assess a client's eligibility for and provide medical assistance in dying. This particular book is pertinent for licensed practical nursing students, such as I was, LPNs should be aware of the criteria, but are not permitted to determine the client's eligibility for MAID. As outlined in Section 241.21 of the Criminal Code, a person may receive medical assistance in dying only if they meet all of the following criteria. And some of this is bullshit. 1, they are eligible but for any applicable minimum period of residence or waiting period would be eligible for health services funded by a government in Canada. They are at least 18 years of age and capable of making decisions with respect to their health. I find this one problematic because there's the issue of mature minors who can make these decisions for their own. We've got this limit of 18 years on it, and I think that's horseshit.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree. And the other reason why it's horseshit is when you're dealing with palliative care and individuals in MAID situations, there's also the idea of legal guardianship and mental faculties and mental assessments.
We're coming to that.
I'm sorry.
No, it's good leaning. It's coming. I have opinions. They're coming up. 3, they have a grievous and irremediable medical condition. There's a whole lot of bullshit surrounding that because grievous, totally subjective term. Irremediable, completely subjective term.
It's kind of wishy-washy.
It is. Number 4, they have made a voluntary request for medical assistance in dying. That, in particular, was not made as a result of external pressure. And again, that's problematic. And finally, they give informed consent to receive medical assistance in dying after having been informed of the means that are available to relieve their suffering, including palliative care. And Declan the Wizard's going to talk about this in a little bit here because he actually read the whole fucking document that I sent him.
I did. It was fucking. It's only like 16 pages. I don't know. I do that like every morning when I get to work in like 10 minutes. Sorry. So what's the question on this document? I do have.
So the question is, this pertains to the government of British Columbia because British Columbia is sort of blazing the trail for the rest of Canada as far as methods of dying with medical assistance. So I believe they got 2. One is the oral route and the other is the IV route. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
So it's a cocktail of drugs they take for the IV route versus oral route. That includes drugs like propofol, which I'm under during electroconvulsive therapy. Although they use about 100 times the dose in case of medical assistance in dying. They also use lidocaine, which they also use in dental procedures, but again, several hundred times more than that to numb the body. And then sometimes potassium or magnesium are used to stop the heart.
I'm not sure about potassium or magnesium. In this one, they specifically talk about rocuronium, which I don't know anything about, unfortunately. But rocuronium is what apparently it seizes the muscles.
It
How do you
paralyzes
spell it?
your
I'll ask our pharmacist.
Yeah, it paralyzes your diaphragm.
Yeah, ROCURO NIUM.
NIUM.
Correct. It paralyzes your diaphragm so you stop breathing. But coma is induced by another separate drug called midazolam. I'm butchering pronunciation.
Midazolam.
Thank you. I'm butchering pronunciation there. So what ends up happening a lot in this intravenous MAID protocol, as well as the oral MAID protocol, it's interspaced. All these drugs are interspaced, so they're not even given at once. They're all interspaced with saline as well.
Right.
So the body has time to react one after the other. So midazolam is coma-inducing, and it's not a quick acting. So they give that the first thing, and then they give lidocaine to start numbing. But also lidocaine is a preventative step because then they give propofol, and they give 1,000 milligrams, so a full gram of propofol.
Which is a fucking shit-ass ton of propofol.
Oh, yeah. I'm in medical research, and funny note, we actually just 2 days ago opened our clinical trial live, and we now have human patients' blood coming into me.
Cool.
So that's awesome.
It's coming into you.
It's just like really inject human patients' blood, and you're like, yeah, blood of the youth, I feel stronger.
Not these kids. These kids are super sick. These kids are ridiculously sick.
So are they taking your blood then and giving it to the kids? So
no, we're taking kid blood. we're taking kid blood, and then we're doing all these analysis on their blood for like a year before we give them our drug, and then we give them our drug and see what happens in their like blood physiology and what like their body actually processes and what happens, and then we do like quality of life assessments.
So you don't derive any like strength or extra life force or
No,
anything out of it?
no.
This isn't a comic book now.
Okay.
It's all good. But yeah, so lidocaine is given right after the midazolam. Lidocaine is given as a preventative measure because propofol, as Leon can attest for, sometimes burns. When it
Hurts
goes
like a son of a bitch.
Yeah, so lidocaine is actually specifically for that. So propofol, is propofol the coma-inducing one? Or is it
Propofol will paralyze your diaphragm. In the cases of electroconvulsive therapy, they give you remifentanil, which is sort of an analgesic that makes you really loopy, and then propofol actually does make you comatose and paralyzes your diaphragm in higher doses such that they have to ventilate you by hand because your lungs aren't actually doing anything spontaneously.
Yes, well, that's what Susan O'Flanagan said about rocuronium. It's a neuromuscular blocking agent, so it paralyzes you. Its use in MAID is that it freezes your diaphragm to stop your breathing, paralyzes your breathing muscles.
Yes, and then lidocaine is given as a preventative measure so that the patient does not feel pain when the propofol or rocuronium.
Whatever.
God, I'm terrible. Rocuronium goes in, so lidocaine is given initially as a sort of like a pain to numb the pain.
Pain control, yeah. Analgesic.
Thank you. Analgesic. And the midazolam is a slow-acting, but puts the patient in a comatose state, so then they don't feel the paralyzation from the propofol and everything. So at that point, they go to sleep and they don't wake up, basically.
Right.
So it's arguably that in itself seems like a very calm, neutral way to pass. It's
humane by all measures.
Yeah, by all measures, because the patient doesn't feel it. There isn't a shock or pain to dying. It's like you're going to sleep.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Anyway, yes, and I did read this document. It's pretty good. The interesting note I thought was when you were reading the legal preset of it, when there was the assessment can only be done by an LPN or a doctor, correct?
By an NP. Nurse practitioner or physician.
I apologize. A nurse practitioner or physician. There's a significant section. So this document that Leon Filger gave me is a protocol document. So this is what the physician or the nurse practitioner would use to administer MAID. And there's a extensive and a large responsibility on also the pharmacist part in this document, including legal responsibility for, especially for, which I understand why it's there because of my work, but making sure you get the labels right, because you have to get those fucking labels right, or else you're screwing them over hardcore, as well as different concentrations and stuff like that to make sure all the drugs are really accurate. So I quite like this protocol, and I think BC definitely has. When I read this protocol, there was enough. From my position, I know a little bit about legal responsibility in medical documents, et cetera, et cetera. So there's enough responsibility and onus placed on here for the practitioners to know what they're responsible for and know what to do. And it seems like it's a simple enough guide towards what to do without being too restrictive or specific inside this protocol. Now, you talked about eligibility, which is nothing I can talk about because I didn't read the documents that you've read and know the knowledge that you know absolutely. But inside just simply this protocol, I think it's a very well-written protocol and very succinct, accurate, and enough legalese to do it. Oh, yeah, there's the sound a little bit, yeah. But that's okay. Anyway, yes, sorry. Leon, if you have any more questions, I'll be happy to answer, but I think I'm good.
Okay, I want to move on to some more bullshit. This is the bit on grievous and irremediable medical conditions. So as outlined in section 241.2.2 of the Criminal Code, a person has a grievous and irremediable medical condition only if they meet all of the following criteria.
Damn.
Which is sketchy because some of this criteria is bullshit. So number one, they have a serious and incurable illness, disease, or disability. That's fairly straightforward, and I think we can all agree that that's a good standard to work from.
Yep.
It's a great standard to work from, and I think you're probably going to address this later, I think, as I'm just thinking down the road from hearing that one phrase. As a guy in medical research, I look at it and like, there's a million like different clinical trials going on right now that you could sign up for. So then you get into, well, is it really not curable? And I like that. And there's that setting that it has to be an already well-established non-clinical trial, as long as they have that caveat. But there's a million of them. And I'm like, it's your body. It's your choice. If you want to volunteer for a clinical trial, great. If you would prefer the MAID route, then that's your choice. I support you fully, 100%. So it's an interesting kind of dichotomy in there. But anyway, sorry.
Number 2, they are in an advanced state of irreversible decline in capability. This bit's deeply problematic to me. Because in an advanced state of irreversible decline, it's the decline bit that upsets me. Because if you take someone, for example, who has cerebral palsy, it's not getting any worse. Their quality of life may be shit.
Yeah.
So why would it have to be it feels to me like it's not in the spirit of the non-malfeasance of MAID to require someone to be in decline in order to access the service. I feel if they're bad enough, there shouldn't be the necessity for a decline in condition in order to access it.
Right.
Number 3, that illness, disease, or disability, or that state of decline causes them enduring physical or psychological suffering that is intolerable to them and that cannot be relieved under conditions that they consider acceptable. This comes into autonomy. My problem is that fuck having to prove that it's unacceptable to you. If you want to die, you have the right to die, period, end of story. Every human being, adult human being of sound mind has the right to choose the time and method of their own passing, in my personal opinion. Mm-hmm. And finally, their natural death, and this is the fucky one, super fucky, their natural death has become reasonably foreseeable, as are all our fucking deaths.
Yep.
Reasonable foreseeable, taking into account all of their medical circumstances without a prognosis necessarily having been made as to the specific length of that time they have remaining.
Oh, that's just a bucket of vague language.
It is.
Yeah, that's terrible. Like, how many people are going to die tonight on the roads? Okay, so your listeners know what city this is being broadcast in, right? Yeah, how many people are going to die tonight on the roads of Saskatoon? So we're a group of 6 people sitting here. So, I would say maybe 1 in 100. So, it's not like have a 0 chance of dying on the road as soon as we leave here.
I do, because I'm not leaving here.
Yes, say you're just hosting. Yeah.
Stay
but
in
like
your
5 of us are
home
like
of safety.
Like, that's bullshit. Yeah. Absolutely.
I don't know.
That's nonsense.
I think that one of the absolutely ridiculous parts, I guess, at the debate at the time that was being had, we had conservative MPs. One of them said on doctor-assisted dying, I mean, you break up with your boyfriend at 16. Everyone's suicidal. That is an exact quote.
That's so
from
flippant.
Conservative MP Marilyn Gladue.
Oh, boy.
And it's like, you think heartbroken teens are going to get access to doctor-assisted suicide? It's just absolutely ridiculous how this, I guess, came about,
Yeah.
It never ceases to amaze me, how politicians will speak on things that they've done little to no research about.
On at all.
Yeah.
And to further that point, it's none of your fucking business.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in the same way abortion is none of you, don't fucking have one if you don't want one. If you don't like MAID, don't fucking do it.
Yeah.
But stop trying to tell people what to do and tell people how they should die. So finally, before we go into the first interview, I want to touch on the other wonky clause, which is conscientious objection, which is the same state that exists in abortion. And basically it says that healthcare providers are not required to participate in MAID if it conflicts with their moral beliefs and values. Conscientious objection. Legislation does not force any person to provide or help in the provision of MAID. If the healthcare practitioner chooses not to participate in MAID, they must promptly notify their employer so that alternate arrangements can be made. The healthcare practitioner must continue to provide safe, competent, ethical, and compassionate care until alternate care arrangements can be made to meet the client's needs or wishes. Yeah. Which is troubling because in remote and northern communities, there may only be one healthcare practitioner, and this makes it a violation of the portability and accessibility clauses of the Canada Health Act if you live in a northern community where you want to access MAID and can't because the only practitioner in town says no.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which essentially then makes it a violation of the Canada Health Act for these practitioners to say no. which is a whole big ethical can of worms.
Yep.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with you, and that was my one critique and one complaint on the protocol you gave me from BC, the BC made protocol. They do have a conscientious objector clause in the protocol itself, is that if one of the practitioners is a conscientious objector, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but if one of the practitioners is that, they can abstain, and I think it outlines that the onus of responsibility falls upon the individual that's trying to receive the care.
The dying person.
The dying person. So the person with MS who has like maybe 2 hours a day of good fucking brain time it's bullshit. I absolutely 200% agree with you on everything you said, and that's fucking bullshit, and that was my one complaint about the thing. Other than that, it's really easy to follow. It's like really well written, but that was bullshit.
Are you ready for the exciting part of the episode?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so the total number of medically assisted deaths in Canada since the legislation was enacted on December 10th, 2015, up until October 31st, 2018, in Canada was 6,749 deaths.
Awesome. Those people died how they wanted.
And one of them is a man named Dan Laramie, who died earlier this year, and I had the very great privilege of interviewing his widow, Steph Laramie.
This interview is incredibly powerful and incredibly intimate. She tells the whole story of how her late husband chose to die, and Leon cried in the middle of interviewing, and I cried while editing it, so just a warning.
Dan Laramie passed away in a medically assisted death on March 2nd of this year after a battle with diabetes complications. Rather than fading into the limelight, Dan opted to hold a farewell party and invited his family and friends. Dan's wife Steph was by his side that day, and she joins me now from Caramuos, British Columbia. Hi Steph, thanks for taking our call.
Hi, James. Yes, I'm actually really excited to do this, and I think it's important.
What can you tell me about Dan? What kind of person was he?
Dan was a man who was like that fall out of the rock kind of a guy. He was a natural musician, a beautiful guitar player. He was always kind and honorable with people about things. And he'd been in the military, so he had certain ways of being. He and I started up later in life. We met in our early 50s at college, and he had gone from, being in the military and running his own business to going to this college where he was told that maybe he'd be a good coach or a counselor. And I think taking that training, and we both were had ended marriages about the same time, and so we met at this time where we wanted change, we wanted to be different people, and we wanted to grow, and we both wanted to be musicians. So, he hadn't played for a long time, and I hadn't played in front of much, so he played guitar and I sang. He took me out to the ocean one day and said, "Sing," so that nobody could hear, and we did a lot of growing together. And he was, I think actually he was a quiet extrovert of the pair of us, and I was a loud introvert, so somehow we kind of managed things. And we had 3 bands when we moved up to Caramuos after living in the Okanagan as my parents were aging. And so Dan was he had a childhood diabetes, and he was 68. He'd been in the military, and he hadn't really paid attention to, he just sort of played hard, partied hard, smoked hard. That was just kind of how the guys did it back in those days. And so he did have diabetes a long time. I didn't really know very much about diabetes. I came from a family that, every family has something, but the health, those kind of health issues weren't usually a big challenge, more heart things. So, but the diabetes at that time, this last couple of 4 or 5 years, his kidneys started to shut down. He'd had surgery in his spine maybe 4 or 5 years ago. One of his discs snapped and just about ended up a paraplegic. So he's had those kind of things happen a lot. And he was kind of an adventurous guy. He loved it when people took risks. And so I don't know quite how. We knew each other 2 years at college, and he was just like the right person. It was just like happened overnight almost. And funny, because I said before, I haven't really talked about this. I'm just penduluming around emotions and things that happened. So as the time was, and I didn't really know that much about diabetes, and he seemed to have things on track about it, so I didn't really pay that much attention because I was starting in a new life too, and we were having fun and being musicians, like I say, and doing well at it. So I guess I just always thought that he would heal and get better, and we kept noticing it and trying it, but he didn't get better, and his blood pressure was off the charts high, and his kidneys eventually shut down between 3 and 5%. So he ended up we actually had a practice one night with our band, and we had to go up to Penticton from Karameus. It's just under a 2-hour drive up to Kelowna. Actually, it was in Kelowna to see a specialist. So we drove up there for the appointment, feeling pretty good. It's a gorgeous drive along the lakes, and we just were feeling good. So we went in, and he was in the hospital that day, and they in surgery very quickly, and actually even going to band and practice. Those guys, our band, Lulu and the Lazy Boys, which is our last band, it was a 5-piece rock and roll band. Those guys were so good with Dan, because he said, as long as I can practice, as long as I can get to the gigs I want to play. He would fall down sometimes, and he couldn't make it.
So at what point then, I mean, as things are going downhill, I remember from the article, Dan had found a blister on his toe.
Well, he had actually, that was actually sort of a metaphoric moment that he spoke of, because that was the thing. He had been experiencing quite a few of these edema and blisters on, and they were quite big. They would be, maybe the size of a loonie and half an inch high. And one of them, he was in the shower one day. He went into the shower, and when he came out, it happened from so fast. And I think that was the one that got him. The one that was, because he'd wake up and he'd find them, or he would notice them, but to go in and not have it and then have it, that was like that was a moment. That was a straw on the camel's back of this. And he'd had a silent heart attack 2 Novembers ago. And so when he went in, he was just in such rough shape, more than we realized, because I think somehow we weren't facing it. We thought we were doing things about it, and so he went in, and he immediately had surgery for, I can't remember if it was hemodialysis or peritoneal dialysis. I have a feeling it was both of them. It was peritoneal dialysis, which needed 2 weeks, but they had to do it immediately because his kidneys weren't working. And he'd had a silent heart attack, and he also had 2 toes amputated. So after that, it went along a little while. It wasn't healing quite quickly enough, so they took off half a foot. And I think he was still doing both of the dialysis, and other things were happening. Everything became sort of exponential. And I was starting to wonder, but I thought, he is a man who's so amazing. He has beat death in ways. He crashed a plane and walked away from it. And he had this amazing energy and belief for the things that were about life. He just expected that he could live through everything. And that was one of the things that was so wonderful about him. And so it was hard to want to even get in the way of his beliefs, but his body was deteriorating very rapidly. He was getting a calcification of some sort that was breaking down. It was in his organs. You could hear it was up around his vocal cords, the way that he spoke. He was falling asleep a lot. And that was actually after we knew. So they one day, one of the gentler doctors came in and he said that we should probably get our things in order. And we thought, oh, okay, that's probably a good idea. If that maybe we have to consider that might be an option, not realizing that they were heading towards it. They just couldn't figure it out. And then he had, and then he had half his leg cut off, just below his knee, taken off. And we're thinking about getting things in order. So we're doing things, and I'm, talking to lawyers and just getting things done just in case. Still not really realizing. And then they had somebody come in who had a really direct manner and had us understand that he really wasn't going to make it through this. And it was kind of terrifying and shocking. And it was just like, I don't know, it was a crazy time to hear that. And they offered the options of that Dan could probably disconnect from the dialysis at any time, and he was on an incredible amount of meds, and he had a couple of more amputations. He had a partial penectomy, which means part of his penis was taken off, and then a full-on one, and it was just, I'd sort of taken pictures and documented through things, and I had learned how to do every wound care along the way, and when he came home for a while, there was home care and all those kind of things. So anyways, when it got back to the doctor, one of them came in, and he was a lot less subtle and a lot more. So we realized that this was going to happen. And then the third one was the new bill about medical assistance in dying. And once we knew that that was available, and once we knew that there was choices, we talked a lot about it. And Dan had, it was a lot for me to be there every minute in the hospital when he was in. It was a lot for both of us to figure out how we could remain strong in all this. Could we remain, crazy about each other? Could we still find ways to love each other and look after each other? It's a big time. And, basically I think we thought if we just stay present pretty much and let things happen. So I think I knew that there was a bill C-44. I didn't know much about it. I had so much new information. Dan had so much new information. And I just was in oversaturation. So what I knew was that this was another way he could do it. And so we talked about...
Who was the first person who presented you with that option?
I think it was his... nephrology, his kidney doctor. Yeah. I think it might have been. And to be honest, I didn't talk to every doctor that talked to Dan. They would often it might have been the doctor of the day that might have said something, but I think it was. And then the second guy that came in was one of those doctors of the day that had a really good, and he liked Dan, and he just had a really good straight up way that worked well to hear and ask and know that this is what we're really talking about. And he was the one that presented them and got Dan connected up with Dr. Robertson, who was our doctor, who was just magnificent when it happened. I hadn't met him until the evening of, and Dan had a couple of times with him. So, and he was very, very good at it, a very gentle spirit, a very, I don't know, both he and the nurse, whose name is Trina, and I don't remember her last name, they felt like they were doing sort of a Zen, be like the willow, be like the water. It was just really great. And the whole energy of the evening was like that, too. And so we had a bunch of discussions, and then finally it was like, well, it would be great to have a party. And so we thought, okay, we will have a party, we'll have music. And the more we talked about it, Dan has a favorite hockey sweater, which he was wearing. He just always wanted to have a red hockey shirt. It never really mattered about the team.
So I was going to ask you,
yes.
In your email, you had described Dan's death as a, quote, magnificent exit. How do you start planning a death party? I mean, once you'd made the conclusion that he wanted to die by doctor-assisted dying, at what point do you say, yeah, let's throw a bash?
I think because when it started to turn to bash was the steps along the way. We talked about it. That would be the best way. He went into the kidney thing and said we could do that. It would only be 2 weeks. And I said, yeah, we'd have a big party and then you'd have 2 miserable weeks. For what? 2 miserable weeks? So why not right at the party? Or he said, well, yeah, I think I'd like it right at the party. So the first thing was, okay, let's have a party. It was going to be small at first, intimate, family, and things just started. And then he realized, and I also, I freelanced for a local paper, and I asked Tara if she would come in and just do a little article in the paper to say this is how Dan went, rather than obituary, but we'd done this thing, and that's where it started. She wrote this amazing story, and it changed her life, changed so many people's lives. So that was part of it. We started to realize how big it was, and Dan and I talked about how much better this felt, even though it was terrifying for him every day at some point as he moved through what the choices were and how to do this. So one day he said to me, he says, I'd like, and then he says, and I said, what do you want? And he says, well, and I said, tell me, you have to tell me everything here. And he said, I think I'd like to have applause at the party. And I said, that's so brilliant. I love it. Applause is wonderful, because when you're in a band and you have a great gig and you've made everybody happy and you're all done at the end and they clap and cheer and you feel like this is the reason I'm here, and it feels wonderful. And it just made us start to think about how we go out. And I started to get this image about this great, I hate going to funerals because it feels like this great big door that slams in your face, and then the only thing on the other side is a mirror, and you're faced with your own fear about your own mortality. And I thought, I don't want to be a slamming door every time somebody dies. That door should be open, and we should be dying with pride and success. So I sent a message to B. Rhodes. We met at Rhodes Wellness College in our early 50s, and it was an experiential college, life skills. It was a tough school for a whole year, and Dan ended up teaching there. And so I asked B if she would issue a certificate for Dan for having successfully completed his whole life. And I'm telling you, every time I told people that, the look in their eyes was just like magical, and I thought, this is a good thing. This one works because I can see it in people's faces. And we thought, who do we ask and what do you want? And he wanted music, and he'd written a whole bunch of songs, and the nurses on Med-South were like, he had so many people holding him up in the hospital, because at a certain point, just after Christmas, he decided that he was going to build a balsa wood 6-foot wingspan Piper Cub. So he has that on his thing, and those nurses every day helped us. That he's carving them out. Every time I come in, I'm buying, a propeller, or I'm buying a special glue or sandpaper. And there's I finally got a dust buster because he had so much dust on his bed, and he's on a special bed that they've brought in that has got him vacuum sealed to this wound care thing when he had the last of the full-on penectomy. And he's got all this stuff happening to him, and he's making them nurses laugh, and he's making them happy, and he's being kind and loving to me, and we get to talk through things. And we did have a bitterness, we did have a bitter, scary part thing where it was hard, but he was my great love, and I knew it was mutual. And I always believed when we hooked up that we had had lives before. So, and I talked to him a lot about the fact that, there's so many religions and there's so many faith systems out there, and if we're in charge of our own lives, you can be in charge of what happens. This doesn't have to be a dying and stopping. It can be a transition. And I said, for whatever you're here, I said, look at you. Look at all the nurses in the hospital. Apparently there's a picture of him in the new wing that they put up at the new Penticton Hospital that just got opened, a big wing. Actually, when he left the hospital on his last day, on the Friday before his transition, it always makes me cry. I had just gone down to the car because I was going to get there to Karamis before the paramedics drove him out. And when he left, they all knew about they all knew everything about everything, and some of them were going to come. They knew about the applause. So when they wheeled him to the elevator to take him down, and then take him out the front entrance, there was a big lineup of staff just applauding him, giving him that applause because they knew that's what he wanted, and they applauded him all the way out. The ambulance drivers, the paramedics didn't know what was going on. Dan said it was pretty funny. And when he got out on the first floor, on the ground floor, the same thing, a great big lineup all the way out the hospital, people cheering and applauding.
I want to pull.
Bring me back anytime.
Yeah.
I haven't been here in a while.
Oh, sorry, you got me going there. I wanted to pull back.
Does it feel great, though?
Yeah.
So do you want me to talk about the night?
Let's.
You ask me what you want.
Yeah.
Keep it in sequence because I'm all over.
Sure. Yeah.
You're doing a
I
great
want to
job.
actually just pull back from the interview for a second here while I get my shit sorted out here. You've got me kind of a mess. I wanted to say in my day job, I guess I'm a nursing student, and currently working on a nephrology wing. So
My love for you just bumped up already.
yeah. So as far as everything you've talked about, what Dan went through health-wise, I've seen firsthand and worked with, and I've been a care aide working in palliative care for the last 8 years. And unfortunately, I work in a Catholic facility. So medical assistance in dying isn't even allowed to be discussed on the floor, which is disgusting to me because in talking with my patients, I would say 50% of them would choose medical assistance if that option was presented to them. So the amount of needless suffering that goes on in palliative care units is just atrocious. And as soon as I get my license, I'm never going to work in palliative care again.
I agree with you.
But I
agree with you.
Yeah. What I had wanted to do, and actually I'm in a bit of an existential crisis right now because I've got an 8-month-old son and I'm never spending any time with him because all my time is spent in practicums. So I'm fairly realistically considering not going back in the fall. And then there's a training program in Regina for an end-of-life doula. And
there was just one in Penticton too. I was asked and told I should take it and have the information sent. I will be working on amazing dying. I have so many plans. So sorry, carry on. I really am interested.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that's what I want to do with my life. I want to go back to school and become an end-of-life doula. And like I had sorted that out in my mind a couple of weeks ago, and then in reading Dan's story, it sort of cemented it in my mind. So I think like at this point in time, I think that's what I'm going to do with my life.
Yes. You know what? I wish I could give you a great big hug right now, and I have to tell you energetically, I got you wrapped up in my heart, mister. Just so you know.
Thank you.
Good.
Are you willing to dive back into the interview?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I was going to ask you, it sounds like you had an overwhelming amount of support. But I'd like to know what barriers you faced. Were there people who said, you shouldn't do this? Did you have friends who said, no, we're not going to go to this? What barriers did you face?
It was so fascinating. I could call them barriers, but I refuse to, because one of the things that I learned that Dan taught me that helped me discover this about myself unknowing was that we are all at different stages of evolution, and once we understand that about each other, we never have to judge anybody again. And I just find that so liberating. So there were family members that could not make it up. Dan's daughter came up, his son. I never heard things about, oh, you shouldn't do this, or the closest I got to it is we do live in Karamis is a village, and lots of people know it. So one of my friends, who's a drummer, works at the local liquor store. She sent me a big long letter one day because I kept away from people very much because I was had been a couple years of caregiving. I was burnt out anyways, and I knew I had to make sure this one thing got pulled off just the way that Dan would want it. And so she sent me this letter saying, you know, I have to tell you the amount of overwhelming support there is for you and Dan, for Dan for being really brave, for you for being really brave. She said every once in a while someone comes out, one of the religious folks, it's Satan starts get flung a while. She said, but that's just more entertainment than anything. But she said overwhelmingly it was. And I looked in one of the global news things, and there was thousands of comments. I couldn't believe how many of them. I've got them in Dutch and Italian, this story, and I don't know, some script I don't actually recognize. So, and the other thing is that honestly, I learned just before Christmas that I have Asperger's and I'm on the autism scale. I've learned great skills along the way, so I realize that I often approach things in the quietest, most sensible way for me and not what other people think about very often. And so as it unfolded, I didn't really think about right or wrong. I always knew from a young age that I have a really intimate, close relationship with death and dying, and it's an important thing in my life that I actually have. I've had people who read hands or do aura things that tell me that I don't know twice now that I have this aura that has a protection around death. And for me, it's a continuum, so I took it from there. And it just seemed, I don't know, what Dan said he wanted. So when he wanted applause, that was good. And then I wrote the college, and they were good at it. And then I started to invite the people that he would love to see. And some of them have not even, I haven't heard from them, people that Dan was looking forward to seeing. Sometimes family couldn't. And what I realized that wherever they are in their own personal journey, they can't do this. They can't even talk about it. They might be on the evolutionary part where it's so terrifying that I can't even get on my own way to go there. I have to curl up, plug my ears, and, you know, play a lot of something so I don't know it. Some people could only come to the front door and they would bring a plant and say, I don't want to disturb, I don't want to this or that. And I used to tell people, it got to the point that we were just going to have, you know, a few people, small. But as we became aware of the importance and the opportunity to offer a certain hope that Dan could do this really big thing. And we could do it together, and we talk about it and what would happen beyond. And so I know that those nurses on Med-South helped them so much through the fearful parts. And once we understood that Dan had that choice, it's funny, we went from feeling even completely out of control to having control over something. And we thought we might have till May. So he was planning it to happen in May. There's 3 months to put things together. It was a full moon. We researched it. The nurses helped, you know, all kinds of stuff. And then it was like, no, you don't have that time. Mm-hmm. And it was moving. It was moving much faster than the healing could. You know, there was just the disease was taking over. And honestly, in Dan's life, he felt like he had learned what he came to do. And I know even on that last day, it was not my Dan. It was Med-South's Danny, because nobody ever called him that. That was his legal name, was Danny. And at first I wanted to correct him, and I went, no, this isn't, he's theirs, and you have to let them have that, because they're going to look after him in ways that you can't. And they did. It was such an amazing experience. To go through that, and some of them keep bringing me back because I will wander.
Okay, I'm going to jump into the next subject here. I'll do a mid-intro here. I'm in conversation with Steph Laramie. Her husband Dan passed away in a medically assisted death on March 2nd of this year. Steph, can you tell me about March 2nd?
March 2nd, I think actually at some level, we had practiced being so present in this, and I think that was one of the things that kept us sane, was being where we are and not worrying too much about what might happen or what did happen. So we had come home the day before, and we'd had movies and family, and then coming up to the party, it was so surreal for me, and I knew how many people in there we could count on. Sometimes at the last minute I had people say, could I come? And I would ask why they might want to come, and they were people who wanted to learn and understand. So, and for me, in a sense, Dan and I had said goodbye in so many ways that was where I was kind of letting him go. And in some ways he felt kind of like, he was so at peace with it all. And we had lots of food, and we put the hospital bed, Shannon's living room, he was in the living room, and she had a window out to the porch, so we had the food out there because Dan loves food. And we have a friend that had come up from the coast who brought some great whiskey and some cigars, and so people just came in. Some people just came in for a minute to say goodbye. Some people were in there for, I think it started, honestly, I can't believe, I think it started at 4. The medical assistance happened around just after 9, maybe it was 9:43. I'm not one to hold on to dates and gather them all up. They take up space unless you need it. So there was, our friends brought guitars. Sometimes everybody would be singing. And they were, I think, 85 or 90 people that came throughout that time, not counting the ones that came to the door. We had people coming out of town, and his daughter and son were there, and his grandkids, 3 of those, his daughter's 4 children. So that was pretty cool. And they all got a chance, and 2 of the little boys too. They were pretty young. I think they're 11 and 9, let's say. I might be wrong. But around that age. And it was really great that they got to experience. I find this wonderful that those little guys got to experience, talk to their grandpa, play some cards with him, knowing what's going to happen to him. And they weren't there for the actual part. They were awake. But something that happened in the last week was both Dan and I were approached by people wondering if there was any way that Dan could take messages across with him. And that was a big thing. And I thought, well, I don't know what that means really, but I know that Dan can't spend all the time taking messages from people because this is a party. And so what we decided on was a burning bowl, and people could write out their messages. So the young grandsons were with their dad, went outside the room at the house we were at. And at the time that Dan was released with the Dr. Robertson process, they burnt the bowl of messages. So there was kind of a double release. I loved the feeling about that and the energy. And, you know, it was so interesting. The people that stayed were willing to go through emotions. They were willing to talk. I watched Dan putting his hand on the people's heads while they cried, while they leaned over, him saying things to people that he'd moved on, and it felt like he'd become the master he came for, and that, I don't know, it was just, that's why it was magical. There were 3 dogs there too, and those dogs seemed to go around and comfort people. Our own little dog, which is a Chihuahua Terrier cross, Jack was there, and I had a little glow-in-the-dark green thing on him, and he got to visit with Dan and hang out. He'd been through a lot of crazy times because it was pretty hard, and he sort of got aggressive for a while because he didn't want me to be stolen. But something happened to him that night that he just grew up in ways, and it seemed everybody that came there was affected and changed.
Can you describe for me, if you're able, what Dan's last minutes looked like?
Okay, right. So, when Dr. Trina and Dr. Robertson came, gave them a place upstairs where they, got their things ready, and they came down and spoke to Dan, explained to him what the process would be, and that it would happen. He was a little concerned because there was so many people partying when he came in. Are you ready? And he's like, yeah, we were definitely ready. And So that was all good. Dan was ready. And the other thing, too, is that Dan, he had to sign off and check in with Dan to make sure that he was competent. And actually, a little bit earlier, Dan got a little bit mad at me because I held off on second or third glass of whiskey because he was getting a little loopy, which was fun, and it was fun to see it. But part of the law is that if you're not competent to answer or sign, then the procedure can't go on.
Right.
And more than anything, I can't imagine him not doing that. So we made sure that happened. So it happened shortly afterwards, and then he lit up another cigar and had a great whiskey. And then there was a point. I left a message with him today because I actually need to sit back and actually, for me, the room went dark, and I was told later the room didn't go dark. And at one point, it seemed like it was really still. And I think that might have happened. And then when Dr. Robertson was there, the lights were on bright. Everybody was gathered around. At that point, there was maybe about 50 some odd people. Some families, some friends, 50 of the definitely the right people to be there were there. And Dr. Robertson came in. I was going to move away, and he said, no, you stand, because I was holding Dan's hand. And I was looking at Dan, and he was so ready. He looked at me, and he was completely at peace, at ease. He knew that he'd helped a lot of people. He'd been a great party. He had music. He had people that loved him there. It was just on that high note. And he'd been given an award for being successful. He made a reconnection with his son, who he needed to do. There was healing there. His ex-wife was there. His kid's mother was there. So when that happened, he was done. He was ready. And so I held his hand, and he looked at me, and then he watched the doctor, because that's where the process was going to start. And just sort of after that first needle, I leaned down, and I felt like he was gone or going. I wasn't too sure. I gave him a last kiss and watched him, and then other ones happened. And when I thought it was quiet, it was just everybody was applauding and cheering and whistling. It was just like the best freaking gig ever. And you know what? When you think about all the other people I saw in that hospital who, alongside of Dan, the peace and the hope that Dan gave, that he made people think about things differently so much, and I see so many other monochromatic lives laying out, taking their pills, waiting for I don't know what, not too sure what hope is, just that day by day. I am so proud of what he did, and I think he's so brave, and I can't think of a better way to go out, you know. And it doesn't matter what the party looks like. It could be in a garden when the first sprinkler goes on, or I don't know. It doesn't matter what people do. And honestly, I'm getting to the point now I'm starting to reconnect. I've been asked to speak at a forum in Kelowna about medical assistance in dying with Dr. Robertson, about that. And I should actually connect up with him, because it'd be good for somebody to talk about it as well. I left a message with him. And I think, why couldn't we have a festival? Not everybody wants to do that. But, you know, maybe there's a car show that people would like to die at, or motorcycles, or classical music, but I like the idea of a festival, and if there's a place that people want to, maybe it's the Festival of Death, and it's just a thing that people look forward to going, because it validates the importance of being true to your life. And I think if we're true to our life, death isn't a big deal. It's like, wow, I'm moving on to college, I'm leaving home, I'm coming out of the nest. I'm part of the continuum. I have consciousness that is eternal, if however you want to look at it. Not everybody does that way, but a lot of people are lost, and they want to be found.
That's wonderful.
And I don't want to, yeah.
And I think we're going to leave it at that. I've been in conversation with Steph Laramie. Her husband Dan passed away earlier this year. on March 2nd after a battle with diabetes complications. So you joined us from Keramos, British Columbia. Thank you so much for taking our call.
Can I say one more thing?
You bet.
It's all about love. It's all about love. If you ain't got love, you ain't tough enough. Those are Dan's words.
That's wonderful.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Right.
And I hope to be in touch again.
Cheers. Yeah, I look forward to it.
All right.
Thanks, James.
Thank
Good
you
job,
so much.
man. Bye-bye.
Right, bye.
Let me know when it's on. Bye.
I will definitely do that.
Okay.
Bye. Fuck me. Was that ever a good interview? Yes.
Medical Assistance in Dying, Part 1. Part 2 will go into a couple more interviews that Leon broke into and continue our exploration of this hard to talk about but deathly important topic. Playing us out, we have Evan, and it's spelt capital EVN. Look them up, and this is their song Iron Front, parentheses, bang it out. See you in the after show. Alrighty, welcome once again to the after show. Just Ood Gallifrey here, and I'm going to read these out. So, welcome to our new Patreon members. The new members of the cult of Valhalla, the new blood in the ranks of the cult that will take grip of the world and bring it happiness and satisfaction once at last. Hail Val. First, we have Canadian Girl, who has her own podcast of the same name. Please check it out, it's great. Eric Mooney, welcome on board, Eric. Thank you very much. James Noble, thank you very much for contributing to the Patreon. Welcome to the cult. The itchiest robes are on the shed to the left if you're a bit of a masochist. Carrie Duffy, thank you for coming on board, putting your money where your mouth is. You're a beautiful human. I bet you have knees that can just make watermelons explode on sight. Nicola Scorpio, or Sepio. Nicola Sepio, thank you for contributing. Welcome to the cult. Thank you for putting your money where your mouth is. You're great. And your name also sounds like the name of like a mafia member if he was a Pokemon. Sarah E., welcome on board. Thank you for signing up to the Patreon. Thank you for becoming a member of the cult of Valhalla. I'm sure she appreciates it, and with every new sheep in her flock, our influence and growth expands. Doug King, welcome to the ranks of Valhalla. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you for contributing. We're going to do good stuff with your money, Doug King. I love your Bigfoot avatar, by the way. Check out the Bigfoot two-parter. I think that's still in the teens of this podcast. Alyssa Hiley. I was talking to Alyssa on Twitter, I think, and they said that they were going to contribute when they could afford it, and then soon enough it showed up, and we really appreciate every penny. Like, we put that dollar option up there just because we don't want to keep anybody that wants to be a part of our community out, and most people can afford $1 a month, so we figure that's a good one. And also, even if you can't afford $1 a month, hit us up on Twitter. We'll probably throw a free Discord link, a free RSS link out there. We don't want to say, oh, you don't have any money, then you can't have the full OVPod experience, because, you know, we've all been in dire straits. We've all been tied up. We've all been, you know, counting dimes at the gas station, that kind of thing. So, you know, if you want to be a part of it, if you want to join the cult, we don't discriminate. It's just, if you want to join the cult and you happen to have some disposable income, that helps both of us, because we'd love to provide you bonus content, and we'd love to be able to support ourselves and buy new things and go on field trips and stuff like that, and Patreon all helps with that. After all that, we have to welcome our newest member, Tybold. Welcome to the Patreon, Tybold. Tybold was kind enough to send his dick pic to the Gmail account. Oh, by the way, that's still going on. If any of you want to send your genital or nudes or lewds to us, we will rate it honestly. We used to have a tagline that said, if nobody else will look at your dick, then we will. But that's a bit negative. That's a bit punchy, downy. So, you know what? Open to it. If you feel like you want to expose yourself, we will rate it on the show. And those that have sent it in before and have heard our ratings, we seem to rate lewds and nudes and dicks like, I don't know, like a contest, like a dog show. It's weird, but we like it. So, if you would like to join the Patreon, just go to www.patreon.com/ovpod. For little as $1 a month, you get access to our Discord server, the ability to vote on upcoming shows, episodes a week early, and all the bonus content in the RSS feed. Thank you very much for listening, and you guys have a lovely, lovely night.
It's all about love. It's all about love. If you ain't got love, you ain't tough enough.